This is my special topics presentation entitled Child Abuse and its Effects on Foster Youth. Child abuse is a terrible epidemic that affects foster youth everywhere, but the United States has one of the worst records of child abuse. Child abuse by definition includes child maltreatment and sexual molestation. It's an important topic to study because of the negative effects it has on children entering adulthood. I argue child abuse has lasting effects on a child's overall mental health, educational outcomes, and socioeconomic status. Children in foster care face maltreatment, sexual abuse, loss of family and friends, and a lesser sense of home stability and an overall safety, which can directly impact their future in terms of mental stability, educational, and socioeconomic status. Children that have been placed in foster care are at high risk of having mental health and emotional challenges such as depression, anxiety, and behavioral issues, as opposed to those children that have not been fostered. This chart compares the percent of children placed in foster care to those that weren't and compared their mental health. They found that the biggest difference was kids in foster care with ADHD and behavioral issues, followed by depression and anxiety. This just shows that kids in foster care are more likely to have developed mental health issues than the kids that are not. This study also found that children in foster care are a vulnerable population to mental instability resulting from a childhood system known for abuse. Child abuse has negative lasting effects on a child's educational outcomes. Most children in foster care endure trauma, and trauma is known to have lasting effects on a child's brain, therefore affecting their productivity and education. Despite the mental challenges that come with being in the system, foster youth still want to go and continue their education by getting a bachelor's degree. But college students who survive trauma have a greater risk of dropping out. A 2018 child abuse and neglect study, organized in the depths of interviewing with a group of college students who had been in foster care system and also decided to pursue a bachelor's degree. The study found that the complex trauma the students lived through led to the mental health issues that played a key role in whether or not they pursued a bachelor's degree, as well as whether or not they dropped out of college. Participants in the fact uh, that the school work itself wasn't the hard part, but it was the depression, anxiety, and PTSD that kept them from actually attending. And obviously, attendance tends to determine whether or not you got a bachelor's degree. Because if you're going to class, you're not learning, and therefore not passing. Another 2018 study interviewed 220 survivors of child maltreatment in foster care. They found that the overall education level of the sample was well below the population's average, and a 63% majority completed an apprenticeship or vocational school without the basic qualifications to enter a university. Child abuse has negative lasting effects on socioeconomic status. When abused in foster care, children tend to run away from their foster homes or have frequent placement changes. A 2011 study found that these factors are associated with an increased risk in the relative risk of becoming homeless. The economic instability the foster kids experience prevents them from forming relationships with their caregivers and other adults, which limits their community connections, therefore limiting their knowledge of programs that can provide housing assistance for when they are out of age of foster care. We already know from earlier that child abuse can cause lasting mental health issues. But this study found that having symptoms of mental health disorder was directly associated with an increased risk of homelessness. This makes sense because of how hard it is for mentally ill to sustain employment. Now that we know what general research has found on child abuse and foster care, we have to look at what the media is saying about these same topics. I first found an article by Chris Stewart from the Springfield News Sun that looked into Ohio's welfare system and found that foster care youth with 14 years and older and experience more foster placements that has caused disruption and trauma. The article also points out how the older children that were abused and neglected longer have been harder to place with foster parents, therefore causing them further trauma. Another article written by Nadia Romero from the Q13 Fox News acknowledged that foster youth aging out of the system struggle with becoming financially stable and independent adults. The article points out that 35% of foster youth will experience homelessness or unstable housing within their first year out of the system, and that extended foster care will give the teens more time to figure out housing, employment, and every other detail about entering adulthood. The last and most recent article I found was written by David Listow from the Fairbanks Daily News Miner. The article suggests that neglect, abuse, a chaotic home life, and a lack of nurturing result in the violence in our own communities. The author also points out that from the moment children exit the womb, their brains grow at a fast rate and says that it is the window that they have to learn the basics of life, referring to taste, smell, language, and the ability to give and accept and love. He emphasizes how if these lessons aren't learned due to neglect or abuse, then that window closes and can cause trauma. So the question remains, does what the media say about child abuse and foster care actually correspond with the academic research we know? From what we found, yes. All the media articles mentioned have successfully acknowledged the neglect and abuse children experience while in foster care, and the lasting trauma it can cause, as well as how damaging it is to their health. The articles also successfully point out that since child abuse, especially in foster care, can cause lasting trauma and affect mental health, that it also means it affects the children into adulthood in terms of housing and employment stability. Overall, the media is aware of the negative and long-term effects child maltreatment has on adulthood outcomes and has been accurately representing the epidemic we know about the topic. I am ending my presentation with the works cited pages, including the journal, article, and media sources.